Sword of Atlas is a tactical role-playing game where the players take control of a party of travelers pitted against AI opponents, where fast-paced decision-making meets grid-based combat in a world where your actions determine the fate of your party. That's a lot of words to say. We are taking a turn meter action system, putting it on a grid, and playing it out in real time. Welcome back, everybody. This week we're talking to Dylan Memmott, who is a combat and encounter designer at Sword of Atlas. He joined the team when I did, which was a few weeks after the whole process started. So Dylan, why don't we start there? Just talking about why, because we had a few choices when we were deciding which team to join. Why did you decide on Sword of Atlas?
So Sword of Atlas, even though the JRPG tactics genre isn't really what I'm used to, it was one of the few games where I could work on combat and try to progress in that form throughout the months. I've learned a ton. I feel like our combat is coming along great. I have definitely enjoyed my ride.
Yeah, being new to the JRPG or tactics generally, has that impacted your work?
Definitely. So tactics RPG, I've actually have never played a tactics RPG until this project. And then I only briefly played Fire Emblem at the very beginning to kind of get my feet wet on how it works. But I actually think it's kind of good because I'm looking at the genre from a completely different perspective. Most of the work I've done in the past has been, third person action platformers mostly, So coming at the tactics RPG genre from that angle, I feel like is what's going to try to set our combat apart a little bit.
Why don't you just describe at a high level what you do? So we say encounter and combat design, but what does that look like in Sword of Atlas? Like what are you building?
I'm our encounter strike team lead. So I'm over our level designers and our tile functionality, our grid movement. And then me specifically, I do all of our enemy design and enemy AI. So most of what I do is managing our level designers for their white box and helping them set up our levels with blueprints and trigger boxes and things like that. Most of my workflow is going to be inside behavior trees. So setting up decorators that check if we want to do a task or ability for the enemies, then setting up services at the end. So we're only doing these abilities every once in a while. We're not constantly casting the most OP ability every single turn for the enemies, and really getting their movement to function well and function around their allies has been a big hurdle for us. So that's where most of my workflow is in that behavior tree.
I think through game design generally, I've come to realize how complicated AI is to make it good. So what's been the biggest challenge for you on this project specifically with the AI?
We're not using the Unreal Engine built-in nav mesh for moving around with the enemies. So we pretty much had to homebrew our movement system for the enemies, checking for players, checking for allies, and moving in a smart way around the battlefield. That has probably been the trickiest part with our adaptation with Unreal.
Cody is day-to-day the level designer. Cody and Renee now are designing the levels. How does your work come into that? Do they kind of give you a canvas that you put an enemy or a boss encounter in, or are you helping design it all? How does that work?
First and foremost, for our game, we're trying to build these level spaces for our narrative beats. And then we're adding in the enemies after the fact. Really the only enemy talk we have before white boxing is just saying, hey, this is a new type of enemy we want to introduce within this level. We need to make sure we have a good introduction space for them. And that's pretty much all we do in terms of setting up for enemies before white boxing.
What about on the system side? There's kind of a team that's focused on the player abilities, but those impact and are impacted by the enemy abilities. So how does that interaction work?
The enemy abilities are using the same system that the player abilities are. Our skill system. So I make sure we collaborate with the systems design team to make sure we're getting all we need for both player abilities and enemy abilities, really collaborating mostly to try to keep them cohesive.
Yeah.
So they don't feel too jarring, too separated.
Any enemies or encounters that you could kind of describe to us? What your design thought process was, what ended up happening, how the player feels during that?
One of my favorite enemies currently is our captain enemy type, which is actually being used for our prologue boss fight. We kind of married our melee unit at the time, the bruiser, and our ranged unit at the time, the archer, and tried to tweak some of those abilities to feel a bit better. And one of my favorite abilities this captain unit has is called Crippling Chain. It's a ranged attack that slows the ATB meter of the player character it hits, as well as teleports them right next to the captain. So during this fight, the players feel like they want to be kiting the boss around, but the boss just kind of says nope, and pulls them right back in. That teleporting ability kind of came later after the fact, and it was kind of a direct idea coming from the level layout.
As we're in the process of developing out kind of the rest of the game, any upcoming encounters you're excited to be designing?
For the rest of the semester, I'm going to be working on our final boss fight, and I am so hyped on that. I don't want to share too much, but we're hoping to do a 2-phase boss fight where the first phase is going to be more agile, and then the second phase is going to be more endurance based. And that I am super, super excited to show.
Thanks for talking with us, Dylan, going over how you approach encounter design and managing of the encounter strike team, as well as kind of your backstory on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great. Thanks so much for having me.